Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Cyber Threats, Is It Safe to Work from Home? I'm delighted that Andy Stiles from Risk Evolves Limited is joining us today to share his knowledge and experience. I'm Robert Allen, APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host today. It's great to see so many people joining us today, and I hope this finds you well. I would personally like to thank the volunteers of the APM London branch who have kindly helped organise this webinar alongside Andy. So, Andy is an experienced leader with over 20 years experience working and assisting businesses. Andy has a long career in the financial services sector and a proven track record in auditing, training, coaching and project delivery. So on that note, I'll pass over to Andy and I hope everyone enjoys today's webinar.
So thank you, Robert. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, it's always hard to build up when someone reads your CV and all what you can and can't do. But for the last 4 years, I've been heavily involved with Risk Evolves as a risk management company. And the first thing that conjures up in people's minds when you talk about risk management is health and safety and those kind of things. We don't deal in health and safety. We've pretty much focused entirely around data and the privacy of data, which brings into this whole world of cyber attacks and threats and GDPR. So some of you may have attended a live event I did a couple of years ago on GDPR. But so everything I'm going to share with you today is sort of imparting some of what we know and we see in terms of the cyber threats and this scary world that can be out there. And obviously in terms of a slide deck, it's titled, Is It Safe to Work from Home? And that just is really a reflection of the fact we're in unprecedented times, really, exceptional circumstances with the pandemic, which has forced a lot of people to work from home environment, which in itself presents some greater risks. So we'll touch on those as we go through. But a lot of what we'll be sharing with you is we're a risk management company. So we're not an IT company. We're not specialists in what measures you need to be put in place, but we'll certainly be able to give you an idea of the things you need to be aware of in terms of the cyber threats, as shown on the agenda here, through to the types of attack you're likely to see, and then why that becomes an added risk from when you're working from home, because the circumstances are different, as then talking around, well, if with all of that in mind, what sort of things should I be thinking about or doing? And this is going to be talking about stuff that you probably know, that you've heard of, that you might quite understand, or you may not understand, and we'll try and give you an understanding or a better understanding what some of this terminology means. And as I said, and obviously with quite a few of you on the call, it's difficult to know your standard or the level that you're coming and that you're knowledgeable in technical IT security measures or not. But we'll give a basic overview, so therefore it's relevant to everyone, with some examples of some of the things we've seen or may have heard to hopefully make it interesting. And then obviously to bring it back into your security world, we'll talk about security standards, because a lot of businesses now are going through security standards, certifications to prove their credentials in terms of the way they protect against risk. And then we'll stop for Q&A. So by all means, type the questions as we go through. Robert will keep an eye on those, and if there's something that's pressing that needs to be addressed on something I may have said or slide, we'll consider that as we go through. So let's get into the content. So what are cyber threats? So I won't go through everything on this slide because you can read yourself in terms of the bullet points there, but we hear a lot around this talk around what the cyber and cyber threats and attacks, but what does it really mean? So in my simple definitions, and you'll gather that all of us in Risk Evolves, we work practically and try to work on simple definitions for things. Cyber encapsulates anything that's enabled really through the internet or the Wi-Fi. So any single device that connects to the internet falls in this definition of cyber. So this, if you think about your home, perhaps your smartphone TV's connected, your fridge might be connected, your Ring doorbell might be connected, in addition to traditional IT such as your PCs, your phones and your iPads. So all of these devices that connect through the internet form this big definition of cyber. And unfortunately, where you've got cyber, there are activists and criminals there that are trying to get into your devices because there's lots of information or data on those devices that is valuable to them. So the threats really are a range of how people are attacking you to steal that information because they can make a financial gain out of it. Or genuinely, it could be just to disrupt you and cause you some pain. On the right-hand side of the slide here, in the purpley colour, you've got who is behind the cyber attacks. This is a slide taken from the National Cyber Security Centre. And a takeaway for all of you today is the National Cyber Security Centre is a UK head office government It's the government trying to provide guidance to us as individuals, to companies, how we protect ourselves from the threats that we see online and with the attackers that go through. But as you can see down here, there's a whole host of types of attackers we go through, from genuine hackers, people that are just trying to steal your information, through to more commonly now online criminals, because the hackers are being employed by criminals to steal the data, through to political activists, terrorists. We see evidence of political campaigns like the US presidential elections being tampered with by the Russian government. And often what we see is all of these things are happening out there in this cyber world, and should you individually or your company be faced with a cyber attack, you won't necessarily know who's committing it, but there will be a purpose for that. So why do these attacks happen? Touched on it really, is that data is a valuable asset, and for a lot of businesses, data is probably now the most valuable asset in any company. And for most companies, all of the assets you've got in terms of the building, you've probably insured, you may have security measures in place, but we've never really taken that same precaution around the data. Now, data will include anything stored on a device, computers, it would include your intellectual property rights, it could include your branding, your customer list, your marketing list. All of that information has a tangible value to hackers. So what I'm just presenting to you here is some idea of the value of some of the information on your PC, as to what that would be worth if it was sold on the dark web. Now, the dark web is where the criminal fraternity go to buy and sell information to commit fraud or crimes. You can go on the dark web to hire contract killers, whatever it may be, but you can buy ransomware kits, malware kits, in order to create or attempt a cyber attack. And a lot of businesses always say to us around, I don't have anything that's of value to me. So it might be the business or it might be you individually. I don't have anything on my PC that's of value. So this gives you an idea of the kind of values that could be associated with data on your PC that these guys are genuinely trying to still hack into. So at the top there, you've got proof of identity, which would be driving licenses or passport details. And every single company, through rights to work and part of the employment law regulations, will be taking copies of this information on every single employee, because they have to hold it for HMRC purposes. But then if you're then subject to somebody hacking into your systems and stealing that data, you can see there's a considerable value attached to each item that they will take. So even for a small business with say 5 to 10 employees, hacking into a system and stealing that identity information, that hacker's going to make a nice tidy return by selling that onto the dark web. And as you can see, just going through the individual layers, personal finance, so your bank account details, your credit card details will all have a tangible value for someone that's stealing this data to sell it on the dark web. It doesn't mean these people will use that data themselves to commit a crime or latter crime, but they can make money just by stealing this information. And I think the interesting one here for me is the credit card details, is that your credit card details and your three-digit CVC number that is obviously applied when you buy anything online, if that information is available, that sells for around about £56 for every single credit card. And I'll touch on a data breach that was occurred with British Airways, where they lost around about 350,000 credit card details. So you can see there is massive value for hackers in stealing this information, because there is monetary value can be applied to every single piece of data. And at the bottom there, you've got lesser values in terms of your Apple account ID and password, or your Netflix account and password. But even things down to your email address and password gives the hacker the ability to turn around and create money from information you hold on your PC. Now, next, there's a couple of videos here which, if with copies of the slide, it's definitely worth diving into, because it just gives you an idea of how easy some of these attacks we're going to talk about can be completed. So there's the coffee shop there with Starbucks just talks about how easy it is for someone to hack your details just by using social media accounts. And then the other one there is around a social engineer that rings you claiming to be someone that they wouldn't do. But this really brings home an important point for all of us, whether we're employees, whether we're individuals just on our own home PCs, is that we share lots of data freely through the internet, whether it be through social media sites, through photos we're sharing, through email attachments. And this is actual quotes from convicted criminals to say that all of that information is easily available to them in order to guess things like your password in order for them to commit a crime. And that is the worrying thing about with all of this, is these attacks are happening regularly, very regularly, and at a frightening, increasingly pace. But because of the information we may have shared through things like social media or Facebook and these kind of things, the information is readily available to the people that want to commit the crimes. And I think just to highlight this even further is that even those of expertise in this field, right, people that are security experts or IT experts around, are susceptible to anybody else when it comes to this. And I remember a presentation done by a social engineer. Now, a social engineer in this day, and it's effectively a common man or woman that's trying to pretend to be something they're not to steal the information. So the social engineers will be employed by criminals to find out what they can about an individual, perhaps a CFO or a CISO or an MD of a company, so they can deliberately target that person to get them to click on something or enable a cyber attack. And this social engineer that was on the dark side, i.e. they were committing this crime, turned to the clean side, become a white hat hacker, if you like, where they was being employed by companies to turn around and prove how vulnerable they were to cyber attack. And this particular one was employed by one of the big 5 banks within the UK. It wasn't declared which bank, but their CISO, their head of security, who was fairly confident that they wouldn't be able to hack or be able to be hacked, the task was given to the social engineer that within the space of 1 week, they had to get that CISO to turn around and click on a phishing email, an email with a malware link or something of that nature. Within 4 days, that person had clicked on 4 malicious links. And the only way that was able to be carried out is because of the information that was shared through Facebook or through your social media, through LinkedIn, through all the other platforms you can use. But the interesting thing with this one is how the depths that these people will go to undertake these kind of targeted attacks. And I said, let's be honest, the reason they're doing it targeted is because they need it to be successful. So this person's social media was pretty much locked down with all the privacy settings that can be set, but their family members weren't. And it was through the information that her son was able to share that they was then able to turn around and commit these 4 clicks that would have caused disruption to the business. That is the scary thing about this, is that where it's targeted now is the information that we've made available historically is available to someone to turn around and commit something going forward. So what kind of common attacks? What are the attacks that we can expect to see? So ransomware is still probably the nastiest form of malicious software or malware. And you will know if you've had a problem with malware because your device will be locked down. Your access to data will be encrypted, which means a password has been applied against it, and you will not be able to use your PC probably at all, or you certainly won't be able to access key files. And the reason it's called ransomware is because this has been deliberately targeted. You've now got the malware on the system, everything is locked, and the criminal, the hacker, will claim a ransom from you to get back your data. The only way you can defend against that is to have good backup or a good IT security company that can rebuild your computer from scratch. You will know if you've ever had a ransomware attack because your device becomes redundant, and depending on the nature of the way you work, could be impacting you, or it could be impacting the whole organisation. So ransomware is still probably the #1 threat to most businesses. The second one, which is common to all of us, which is whether it's in our personal capacity or as an employee, is phishing emails. And phishing emails just brings into play all of the general rubbish you see about the prince of so-and-so wants to link up with you, or you've won this free prize. So actually stuff now that's very clever and very targeted to get you to click. And the purpose of a phishing email is to extort the information or the data that can then be sold, that then can be used in a latter crime of whatever description it may be. And in terms of the way we work now, it's obviously more common that we use things like iPads or phones to access the same information that we would do through a PC or a computer. And it's recognised through the criminal fraternity that there's data leakage now going out into some of these other devices, which may not be as secure as your PC, may not have had the same security measures built in, but they can now deliberately target these portable devices, the storage devices, USBs or whatever it may be, to steal data in the same way. And let's be honest, they want to do whatever is the least line of resistance to steal the data. They want to be able to do it. Then you've got good old hacking, which is people just genuinely trying to break into your system with using fake passwords or weak passwords, or trying to break into those. But we're also seeing more commonly now the insider threat, which is staff leaking your data, staff creating a data breach, or doing something that you didn't expect that creates or leads to a cyber attack. And there's been classic examples of staff, disgruntled employees that have taken action or certainly committed a crime and stolen data or breached data deliberately, which causes the business an issue, but obviously in breach of other aspects that go with it. So they're the kind of attacks. How common are they? And again, I'm not going to touch on everything on this slide. You can read some of the stats and figures yourself, but there are some startling things that I'd like to point out. So at the top right there, UK cybercrime victims lose £190,000 per day. That gives you an idea of the scale and volume of the kind of data that's being sold. Action fraud is part of the police. On the bottom right there, it talks about 5.3 million had been lost through just over 2,000 reported crimes. That was a figure probably back around about early July, so that will be significantly higher now. The value behind it, criminals are making a fortune out of these kind of things. But then you've got on the left-hand side just some of the stats that talk around the volumes and the likelihood. So things like 1 in 10 URLs are malicious. Now, a URL is a website page. So 1 in 10 website pages you will click on is potentially malicious. And that could be that you're on a genuine website, such as a Facebook or a social media account, where there's links that come off that are malicious, that are going to introduce some kind of damage to your computer or enable a hack of your device where data can be stolen. That is a frightening figure. And as said, as a result of what we see, the number of fake or malicious URLs continues to rise. And then down the bottom, you've got the two around a hacker pretty much takes place every 39 seconds. And in terms of ransomware attacks within the UK, it's estimated that a ransomware attack is attempted every 40 seconds in the UK. That figure is likely to go down, and it's expected that could come down as low as every 20 seconds. We're going to see a problem. It is a huge problem, and the reason we're seeing these huge problems is because people can make money out of this, and the more money the criminals are making, the more technically advanced they get to be able to commit these kind of crimes. But what really accelerates some of these kind of crimes is bad news. So the fact we're in a global pandemic at the moment with coronavirus, the level of cybercrime and fake website pages has gone up significantly. Now at the top there it says emails up 667%. That was something taken around about the beginning of June. I think the estimate is now it's close to 1,400%. But the one that really stands out to me there is at the bottom around Google is blocking 18 million coronavirus scans every single day. So they're trying to stop this happening, but unfortunately the volume of it is accelerating and causing us an issue. Bad news is definitely a means to turn around and accelerate the kind of problems that we're seeing. So what kind of attacks, and I'll skip through these, that you get. A lot of this will come through email. Probably 95% of most successful attacks will come through email, and you're going to get the obvious, like this one, which has come through saying it's important, but other than view the article, there's nothing else in the email, through to probably the old age historical ones you would have seen that are impersonally addressed, that want you to click on a link because there's a security issue on your PC. But they are becoming better. So you may see something coming from genuine websites like Netflix, and this looks totally genuine. Your validation has failed. It wants you to click the link, which would be dodgy, but whether or not you do that is a personal choice, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, through to genuine emails that look like they've come from Office 365 about your accounts being suspended. Or this is one that the MD of our company, Risk Evolve, sent out, and this was a phishing test that was completed on us, where we knew our security policies were being updated. I was expecting this, and I clicked on this email because I knew I needed to see the new policy, but again was caught out. The quality of the phishing emails is getting better and better, and as I said, it accelerates through. This can be through fake PPE. We've seen quite an increase in the number of emails coming through from those, through to things, genuine things that look genuine, something like the DocuSign pages that I know APM use, certainly with some of the paperwork I've will use this. You get something like it looks genuine. If you click on it, you then probably bought into some malware if it's been deliberately targeted at you to cause problems to your PC. Now, the National Cybersecurity Centre, as I mentioned at the outset, are there to help keep the UK safe from cyber attack. So a takeaway from today is if you get any suspicious emails that you suspect to be phishing where they are clearly not genuine, you can forward them on to report at phishing.gov.uk, because that will give the National Cybersecurity Centre the power to work with the police to try and take down some of these sites or catch the criminals that are doing this in the first place. I think the worrying thing, and as I said, data leakage means that it's not just coming through emails now, so we're seeing quite a lot of phishing, what would call is smishing, which is done by phone or text messaging, and you'll get on the top left there a message that says you've got a £458 refund. On a text, you can't get the same sense with looking at the website addresses to see if it's genuine, so you might innocently tap on that address and then it's going to take you to a fake website page that looks genuine, looks like a UK government page. You're going to enter your details in there, and all that's going to happen is those details will be used or mined for criminal gain, but you don't suffer as a result of it. But these are how these things are already taking place. And track and trace, yes, is already on the bandwagon of being attacked. So there is a possibility you could get fake or scam text messages wanting to click on things to do with the track and trace if you signed up for it. As I said, criminals will use whatever targets they will use. The kinds of smishing attacks we've seen recently all come from what seem to be reputable departments. We've seen quite a few from the DVLA, where they're likely to put in there the actual amount you've paid for your vehicle tax and when you paid it. Where they get that data from, I don't know, but it appears genuine through to Customs and Revenues, Netflix, Department of Pension. These are happening all of the time, and I'm sure quite a few on the call would have seen some of these and hopefully wouldn't have clicked or taken it further. The other area that is quite scary with this at the moment is called vishing, which is fake telephone calls, where people can impersonate a message or believe you to send through a message or a phone call on your phone, which then pops up to say this is genuine because it's coming from a known contact, but actually it's a fake. My mother-in-law was subject to a recent vishing attempt where Amazon called her about a query with a genuine payment she'd made to Amazon. How they get those details, I don't know, but all it was a means for that criminal to try and access her bank account details, which thankfully she got wise to and stopped herself from doing that. My next door neighbour, but one was subject to a phishing call from HSBC Security. Fairly genuine, it all seemed genuine. They went through the proper security checks, and unfortunately she didn't get wise to this because she did feel it was a genuine claim and eventually lost £20,000 out of the bank account. These things are genuinely happen. Hopefully with all of you, you're wise to the fact, but there may be members of your family that are less so, the elderly, etc. These guys that are doing this have no scruples. They all target the least line of defence, the low-hanging fruit, if you like, to turn around and commit these crimes. And in terms of the general attacks, just to finish off here, you don't always know you've got a problem. So what happens when you click on a link in an email? It may not be obvious. It may be obvious, but in a lot of cases it's not. So to the far left, if you click on an email, invariably it might take you to a page where you have to enter some credentials details, your username and password, your bank account details. In entering those details, you then click send, submit, whatever it may be, and nothing happens. So then you may attempt to do it again and nothing happens. But what has genuinely happened in the background is that information has now been put on the dark web for people to purchase and then use that credit card details to make payments, to commit fraud elsewhere. So just clicking on something that happened where you're not aware that's been a problem for you could actually be a bigger problem in the criminal world or in financial crime or whatever it may be. And we need to get better at being confident at shouting about those, because it could stop a much later problem or data breach or something of that nature. In the middle, if you've downloaded some malware, you're more likely to see an impact. Malware is often deliberately targeted at you because you've got vulnerabilities on your computers, and that could be apps or software you've downloaded that has not been updated or hasn't had the latest security applications applied. So they will deliberately target those as a means of them to take control of your PC. So they will put in the necessary coding for them to take possession. And they said where it is deliberately targeted, it is invariably attacking those unpatched software. So this will be software like, for example, you've got video conference software that you've downloaded and used with a particular client. You've only ever used it with that client because it's not the MS Teams or the Zooms of this world. you don't use that software again for another year. It's still sitting on your device, which means you've not been going into it to get the updates. It's that kind of thing that's being targeted. It's stuff that you've downloaded some point in the past or historically that hasn't been updated, whereas in fact you should just be deleting it because it's not needed. You then get into other areas like keyloggers, which means that once the malware's been downloaded, the hacker is basically getting a record of every key press you make on your computer. So therefore, from that, they can then they realise you've gone to your bank account and start keylogging all the information to ascertain passwords or secure codes, whatever you may be using it. But in particular with malware, probably the one that is more worrying tends to be around the Trojans or the remote access Trojans. So a RAT or remote access Trojan is, if you, in a genuine scenario, this could be your IT company or you're on the phone call to genuinely with Microsoft and they need to take, or Apple, and they need to take over your device. They will send you a link and you click that enables them to start accessing files on your computer. A remote access Trojan is something that happens in exactly the same way that you've approved without knowing it by clicking on a phishing email, and that RAT could sit on your computer for a long period of time, as could a keylogger, without you ever noticing it. And it could be there for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, whatever it may be, so the hacker can genuinely ascertain and gain enough information about you and what you've got for their own financial gain. And a lot of the malware or the antivirus we've got may not detect some of these kind of things. So they're quite frightening when they happen, and you may not know that you've necessarily gotten them. Clearly on the far right side, you'll definitely know you've got a problem because ransomware will be instant, and in some cases if you click on a link that takes you to ransomware, within 30 seconds your computer will be completely locked and you will be completely lost because you can't use the device. So I think the reason I mention this to you is because we think we can see these phishing emails, but often we click on something, nothing really happens, and we just think, well, there's nothing to worry about. Actually, if they're stealing your credentials are being stolen online. So we should be conscious, we should be mindful of it, and in some cases, therefore, we should be taking preventative actions like changing passwords or whatever it may be, but you need to be alert to these things all the time. So what are the risks that we genuinely face? Well, the top three there are all linked into cybercrime. So it is the cyber threats, as we touched on there. Increasingly now we're seeing an increase in supply chains being attacked as a means to get into a larger company. So this could be a small supplier into a blue chip entity, for example, that's been hacked, and that then becomes a trusted gateway for the hacker to get into that supply to the bigger company. And the breach with British Airways was a classic example of that, which I'll touch on in a minute. But invariably, your weakest area is always going to be your staff and awareness. The bottom three all lead to really the impact of complaints or breaches or that have occurred as a result of the top three. But these are now the biggest threats that face any business. The British Airways, this is really just to highlight what happens in the event of something fairly serious for an organisation. So back in 2018, September 2018, British Airways went public with the fact that they had a hack, they had a data breach, and the hacker had stolen some 350,000 credit card details. So they've gone out publicly to tell all these people. Now, if you were one of those people, I wasn't, but you're more likely, if you've heard that, you'd be telling friends and so on and so forth. So with that level of circulation of numbers, all these people are suddenly going to start contacting British Airways. So there's going to be a massive business disruption around the volumes they're going to have to handle and deal with as a result of declaring the fact they've had an incident. You've got the reputational damage because there's a level of trust now that's been broken, because if your data was with British Airways and it's been lost, you're going to be concerned, in which case you can exercise rights under GDPR around data subject access requests, erasure requests. So the fact this happened in September 2018, British Airways suffered huge disruption to what their business was facing. They were then subject to ICO scrutiny, the ICO obviously being the regulator for GDPR and issue the fines, of which financial penalties that could then come. And it was 2 weeks ago they announced they were fined £20 million. The original fine was meant to be near 183 million, but because of the disruption of coronavirus and loss of income, that was brought down. Now, why do I mention this in terms of supply chains? Because this genuinely wasn't, or is understood not to have been a genuine attack on British Airways, but it was through a third party supplier that British Airways then suffered all these consequences. And the last bullet is the ambulance chasers. As I said, people love bad news. You've now got claimants trying to claim compensation back from BA, and I think there's around about 650,000 claimants still for BA. massive disruption, and this was down to potentially a third party that was hacked, therefore got into British Airways. And if you then went through all the details and we ever got to share those details, you could probably bet your bottom dollar that came from a member of staff in that third party clicking on a phishing email or URL link that was malicious. So as a result of this supply chain, we are definitely seeing that website hosts are being attacked, third-party software companies are being attacked, data warehouses are subject to that as our cloud platform. So the migration now of the criminal world is doing targeting these things, because the price to get into a bigger organisation like British Airways, that of course would have had good security in place, is significant. So bringing into account, there's a scary world of this. What are the risks when we work from home? Now, there's two scenarios when we work from home. We're either going to be using a computer that's provided to us by work, or we're going to be using our home devices. Both have added security risks depending on the nature of the security and measures that you have in place. So from a work device, if it's been securely set up, then you're going to have security controls in place that are going to try and keep you safe. You're going to have things like antivirus software loaded, spam filters, URL blocks or IP blocks, so therefore it's protecting your device from what would be seen as the natural threats. If it's controlled by your company when you're using your PC at home, then they will be responsible for making sure your device and all the software that you use is fully patched, and they've probably removed or restricted your administrator rights. Administrator rights are the main control of a PC. If a hacker gets an administrator, if a hacker is able to access a computer via admin rights, you stand to lose far much more. So in most cases, companies do not allow admin rights with local users, but that depends on what your company has done. Typically, also, a company device will be encrypted, which means if it's ever lost or stolen, the information is all protected without a password or without the encryption key to unlock it. And also what tends to happen with work devices, there's some form of what's called endpoint control, which is like an agent or mobile device management, whereby your company can access your PC externally or see what's happening on your device. So depending on your working, if you're using a company device working from home, depends what measures you've got in place as to how secure you will be. Alternatively, working from home, a company may have allowed you to use your own device, in which case, when you think about the levels of security that apply to a company PC, what have you got on your home PC? Do you have AV? Do you have antivirus? Do you have filtering? Are you aware what software is on there? Have you patched it? Have you got policy controls whereby someone's taking and transferring, storing data on a home PC is protected, because that's your IPR going out? So immediately, this new normal that's been created for us suddenly throws up some considerations. For a work device, have we properly secured it with all the things that we know that we should do, but we've never really invested in it, through to we're allowing people to use their own devices, which genuinely may not be as secure. And as you can see down there in the bottom, that working from a home office network is 3.5 times more likely to be susceptible to the kinds of attacks we're talking about and the malware. So we really go on. So what other considerations are there that pose a risk when we're working from home? So typically a user may be less diligent. I mean, if you turn around and think you're working in an office environment, you're probably less likely to go onto websites that are non-work related, because people are going to see that. You're more likely to, if you need to throw away hard copy or paper, you're going to put it in a confidential waste bin, or you're going to shred it. Whereas at home, what do? You put in paper into your normal household waste, because that itself presents a challenge. Obviously, what we're seeing a lot now, and a lot of the threats we're beginning to see, is because at home, if you're using a home device, more than just you use that home device. So if you're using your device and you allow your family to use that same device, they're now potentially accessing company data, which in itself is a breach. But obviously, it opens up the realms of you've got other users that may not be as secure as what you do, because you work for a company that set these security measures up with things such as passwords. And, there's a lot of talk around passwords, but if we make our lives easier with easily guessable or short passwords, then we're going to leave a device much more susceptible. It's proven beyond doubt that a device that's left at home is less secure, is more likely to be stolen than it would be in an office environment, because the level of measures of security, just in physical security, may not be quite as great. Wi-Fi and personal Wi-Fi. Obviously, if you're working from home, you're going to use your home router to turn around and access company data. You may be doing that through secure channels such as a VPN, but personal Wi-Fi tends to be less secure than a corporate Wi-Fi that's been set up by your company. So typically, let's say a BT Home Hub would come with a default user admin and password. People don't go in and change those user admin and default passwords, and that information tends to be available through the dark web. So if you've never gone into your home router and changed your admin password, that may already data that's already available to hackers to be able to access that. That wouldn't happen in an office environment because your IT or your IT support would have configured that to be much stronger. Touch on hard copy records, paperwork. What do you do with all your hard copy? Are we just putting it in the normal household waste, because in itself that is less control or secure than you would in your homework or in an office working environment? And then the challenges around, well, data that you've got perhaps on a personal device that you've used, how do we get that information back or get control of that information when somebody does return to the office and start working in those environments? So from a business point of view, considerations, well, how do we control what a person does on their PC when they're accessing company data without having some kind of endpoint control, mobile device management, SIEM solution? There is easy ways that the business will lose sight of what software or what is happening on someone's computer. Clearly, we've seen a huge prevalence and increase in the use of video conferencing and cloud platforms, and it's proven that Zoom have gone from pretty much a low secure position to massively increasing their security through the process of what they are now delivering, to the extent that people could just jump in on Zoom calls unannounced, a bit like your wedding plan or wedding gate crashes. The same thing's been happening with video conferencing. It all comes down to security settings. So again, things like your video conferencing cloud platforms present a risk when you're working from a home environment, because you might be accessing it through an insecure Wi-Fi channel or whatever it may be. Patching, again, what software have you got that's creating vulnerabilities that's going to make your company data or confidential data more susceptible to attack? And an interesting one, and I saw this with a business that I audited last week for ISO 27001, is the person had no company phone and all they had was their company PC. If they genuinely had a ransomware attack on that PC and the PC was then rendered useless, they couldn't use it, how was they meant to report that to their employers? Because they didn't have any details on their personal phone of contact lists for anyone at work, and they're working from home environments. You've got a major data breach, you've got a major issue with ransomware, and they couldn't genuinely report it to the business to start doing what they needed to do to meet their legal obligations in terms of data breach, etc., etc. So, if you're going to allow people to work from home, if you get that scenario where they just cannot, are there contactless channels in which we can follow through? And then we talk about data in transit and how do we secure that, and are we less diligent around using passwords or encryption for attachments in emails that may otherwise be protected if we were working in an office environment. So getting near the end now, which I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear. As I said, hopefully it's been interesting. Robert's not interrupted me yet with any questions, so we'll touch on those as we go through. But so what sort of things should we be doing then to protect ourselves or our data? Now this is purely the kinds of things we need to be thinking about. Hopefully your company or your employers will be doing this, but for me as a practice, I will never, where I can, use a website link in an email. So if I've had an email, let's say for example from Facebook, I will go onto Facebook pages rather than using the link in the email. Some of you may be practicing that already, but invariably, if you can avoid using the link in the email, you've increased massively or decreased your chances of being susceptible to some kind of malware attack. Strong passwords, passwords are an interesting one because they come back into the spotlight as to how important they are. So what is a strong password? Typically now an 8-character password can be regarded as strong if it's multi-character, lowercase, uppercase, symbols and numbers. And that's because it's hard to break. I think where a hacker may use a device to try and guess your password, so this is some kind of configuration that's running in the background just to run and test the kind of characters you might use them, which is called brute force. An 8-digit password generally would take about a year to break under that kind of brute force attack. 6 characters or less is usually broken in a matter of minutes. A 12-digit character password is usually around about 3 years, through to anything over, say, 15 and above, almost unbreakable. So a strong password is a combination of different characters, and it must be as long as possible. And where you can, switch on multi-factor authentication or 2-factor authentication. This just means that where it's an added layer of security that, let's say, for example, you're trying to access your company email account from a device you've not used before. When you log on, it will prompt you to enter a 6-digit code, which only you will get. So you enter the code to prove it's genuine. If that's a hacker trying to do it, they're not going to get the code and its protection. So wherever possible, for all of your key systems or platforms you use, make sure you switched on multi-factor authentication. You must also have antivirus and malware software on your PCs. I use Mac devices and I have antivirus on my devices because they're now increasingly being targeted for malware. And make sure that your antivirus is set to run and update regularly. So it's scanning regularly and it's updating regularly to find anything that you may have. Firewalls are trying to stop nasty traffic. Firewalls will be built into all your Wi-Fi access points, your routers, but they've also got firewalls on every single device. And in a lot of cases, the firewalls are turned off devices because it slows down some of the performance of the computer. Keep your firewall on your device as well, because you've then got 2 layers of protection against these kind of attacks that may happen. Software, quite simply, if you don't use the software anymore, get rid of it, but make sure it's kept up to date. And make sure you secured your Wi-Fi access by changing the passwords or using VPNs. A VPN is a cloud or protection that's put on so people can't spy on you. And then probably the last slide I'll cover with you for today, conscious of the time, you need to be constantly alert to these kind of scams going through. It's not just phishing now, it's going to be genuine emails that look genuine, it's going to be texts, it's going to be phone calls that come through. Importantly, don't mix your business data with personal data. So don't use your business PC to do what you'd normally do on a personal PC like your social media, because it's increasing your risk of the threats that could come through. Only ever visit or use trusted sites. So if you're talking about your mobile devices, only use the App Store or the G Store because they are proven to be secure apps that you'll be using. Through to websites, you should be looking for the padlock sign to make sure that you're only visiting something you're safe. If in doubt, shout, because if there's any problems whatsoever, it's much better to get on top of it early. And then consider cyber awareness training. So this is some of what we're touching on today, but I would recommend dialing in or looking on the National Cybersecurity Centre website, because they provide lots of guidance, as well as Action Fraud, because they provide lots of guidance to go with it. And then, like I said, data is now one of your most valuable assets, and cyber threat is trying to steal that data. So have you got insurance against cyber threats and cyber attacks? Because it's probably necessary. A final slide, I've got a few more here, but for the final slide for today, so we can then go into questions. In terms of what we're talking about here, it's not a case if you're going to be attacked. You are definitely going to be attacked. There's absolutely no 2 ways about it. The level of attack you don't know, because you don't know necessarily who would have committed the crime, and the consequences of that may be damaging to you or could be financially damaging to bigger organisations. If we can carry on with that level of scepticism around the way we work, and from home or in an office environment or when we're online, we're going to be in a much safer place. Open the line up for some questions, if we have any. And I said, more than happy to touch on anything or questions related to what we've been talking about today.
Excellent, thank you, Andy. Some scary stuff there, and I'm looking around my house now and questioning how I do things, but as you say, good knowledge to know.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I've said, I'm deliberately highlighting some of the worst case scenarios, but this is genuinely happening. This is live. The people that are committing these kind of things have no scruples, so they will just target you. And even if they've just hacked into your TV because your TV is linked to your Wi-Fi, they can turn on cameras to watch what you're doing. That's an invasion of privacy that I'm not comfortable with, as I'm sure a lot of people are. So if by putting some of this scare behind it makes us more conscious or take actions that perhaps we've put off before, I do think that to be a positive thing.
Totally agree. And there's some lovely comments coming through from everyone who's joined us saying thank you for sharing. someone said this should be compulsory watching for all employees, and some people have asked about the recording of this, and we'll definitely put it on APM YouTube in the coming days. So please feel free to watch it again, but also share it with your colleagues or friends to keep everyone safe. Alan's asked, he's first said, thank you for the presentation. How do you balance the need for high security against being so complicated that people circumvent it themselves? For example, if it must be a strong or complicated password, and then in brackets, which is good, people might write it down, which is bad.
Yeah, I've never been an advocate, right? And you're quite right, I think, Alan, who asked the question. There is always a balance that needs to be struck with this, and the point of putting security measures is it's got to be commensurate with the risks that you face with some of these attacks. If you set up your business, you will understand the kinds of threats that you have because you would have seen evidence of it in the past. So we know that you're going to be susceptible to ransomware. We know you're going to be susceptible to phishing emails. In terms of those strong passwords, we need strong passwords anyway, and the guidance that the National Cybersecurity Centre has got on that is excellent, as well as the knowledge around key passwords. These online where you can keep all your passwords safe are excellent as well. But as I said, for me personally, I've got an 8-digit password that I use for everything I do, and then I've got something associated to whatever I'm doing. So I have a prefix and a suffix, which makes my passwords often up to 20 characters long. They're strong, but I will never forget any of my passwords because there's association and a common platform that goes with it. But you do need to strike that balance. You shouldn't be making it inconvenient for users, but you do have to make sure you're protecting, if you like, your crown jewels and that data that could be stolen. That the consequence of that be stolen will be so significant, it's going to cause you much greater pain than it would be for a user that's claiming that it's inconvenient for them. So if that helps, Alan.
Excellent, thank you, Andy. And yeah, Alan's probably either changing his passwords quickly or starting a little fire of his notepads with all these passwords down. So hopefully that helps, Alan. Abadoon, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly there, has said, what do you do when you realise you've clicked on a phishing email and potentially given someone your personal details? You know, it might be too late by that stage.
Yeah, I mean, so this is going to happen. You know, we're all going to get caught out at some point. It's a slide I didn't show to us, conscious of time, but if something bad does happen, any cybercrime is going to be enabled the fact you're online. So the safest thing is always do is just disconnect your Wi-Fi, unplug anything in terms that connects you to the Wi-Fi, because that's going to limit the damage that goes with it. Absolute minimum change of passwords. So if that's come through on your email account as a compromise, you must change your email account password, but also consider changing other passwords that could have been compromised as a result of the hacker getting into you. Always advise, if you know that's potentially linked, to speak to your bank, report the incident to Action Fraud, which is the police department or police that are trying to catch these people in the first place, so they will give some guidance with it. Obviously contact your employer and IT support, because they will give you guidance what to do. And as I said, then you may also then need to consider engaging a third party depending what's happened. If it's obvious it's ransomware, you're probably going to need a third party to help you. If it's not, and it just looks like something dodgy has happened, invariably changing your passwords will cut the first line of easy access for a hacker to be able to get into you. So hopefully that helps. This is obviously not a comprehensive list, but it gives you some of the headline measures that we should be thinking about.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. So Darren has asked if you're able, if possible, to recommend any free AV/firewall products.
I've got a Mac and I use free AVG, and that's because AV, it's not advanced enough. I suppose I'm hesitant or thinking in the sense because all of the AV companies are designed to turn around and provide protection for the obvious attacks. They always work in arrears of the kind of malware that's out there, and they will update themselves. So what may have been new malware created today that could be a problem for users, the malware, the antivirus is updated for everyone tomorrow to stop them getting infected with it. But the free versions tend to only target those top line known viruses or malware that could be out there. So investing in something that is a little bit more robust will give you added layers of defense. if you look at there's adverts on TV now for all the big name players, they're all going to serve a purpose. And in my view, free AV is definitely better than nothing. But invariably, you pay for what you get. I'm a great believer you pay for what you get. So therefore, my honest view would be something where you're paying a minimal subscription is going to give you something better than the free version.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy, and I hope that helps Darren. I think kind of this follows on nicely from Anchor has mentioned, especially at these current times with budget shortages. How should a business balance between investment in cybersecurity and investment in innovative information technologies?
It has to come down to a knowledge of what your cyber risks are. So what do you stand to lose if you're an organisation in terms of the data that's going to be lost or stolen? So we're talking about personal data. So if you mine or use lots of personal data, you're going to face the consequences through GDPR, Data Protection Act 2018, of the potential fines, which are significant or can be significant. Through to it could be the demise of your business if you've lost your IP or you've lost your client base. So therefore, if you understand the risks in terms of the data you hold, your crown jewels, you're then going to start to build measures that would help to protect you with it. Something I didn't touch on, there's a number of security standards that a business can aim to achieve. So I've put the slide up now as to how you can demonstrate that you're doing the right kind of things for security. So let's say that you are subject to a major data breach or something. If you've got these security measures in place, all of the offset in terms of penalties that might come your way will be lessened because they can see you're trying to do the right thing. So we start off at the bottom level with something like Cyber Essentials, which is aimed at smaller businesses to put in place the basic measures to keep them safe, through to the belt and braces, which is ISO 27001, which is a pure risk assessment of all the risks you've got and how you then control users, suppliers, anything that could involve a risk or loss of your data. The investment has got to come down, though, from understanding the risks and the consequences of a threat to your business. So that may not, I can't remember who asked the question, but it may not answer it fully, but your start point with this is understanding what you stand to lose. And the greater the risk in what you stand to lose will mean your investment in what you want to do, and some of these strong technologies will help. For us as a risk management company, we tend to play that middleman between an IT company that's trying to sell you some of these solutions against balancing that risk. And in some cases, the IT company, I'd say, are trying to sell you things you probably don't need. But obviously, if you don't understand some of that world, so we often play a middleman with those kind of things, which we know a lot of companies use us for. So hopefully that helps. But it's purely risk assessment.
Excellent, thank you, Andy, and that's for Anchor. Some people have posted comments or questions around, I guess, the standard package of security that you get with like MS Windows 10, or you mentioned your Mac earlier. Is that enough, or should we all be looking to add an extra layer? That probably ties in kind of what you said a minute ago about, I suppose, it's risk versus.
It is, yeah. I mean, obviously, because you've got companies that are out like the Microsoft, like the Google, so they're all selling you now the fact they've got added security in there. So they're being built deliberately to try and stop some of these attacks. But that's never going to counteract someone that clicks on a phishing email, because that's going to bypass a lot of those defences. So therefore, awareness is always good. So there's always what's now described through National Site as layers of security. You've got to think about all the layers that are necessary. So what will come in built with these things, absolutely great tick box, great start point. And if you've got a Microsoft, say, example that's giving you added security that you wouldn't get through an Apple, that may be your preference to choose that. But then you need to think about some of these other things around, well, does Bitdefender that comes with Microsoft, does that give me the sufficient antivirus protection I would need versus a paid service, or what my IT company might provide for me? Yeah, so that's probably the best way to answer, is that it's definitely going to help, but without knowing the risk of what you stand to lose, you don't know whether you need to invest in more. In terms of me and what my colleagues in Risk Evolves will say, if you're an organisation, I would invest always in Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials it was a standard that was devised for UK only, looking at what kind of threats businesses face, and what what it came down to, there's 5 key areas of protection that are needed. Some of it will be inbuilt with your device, but some of it will be other added measures that you need to put in place. If you pass Cyber Essentials, you reduce your risk of threat by around about 80%. And if you choose to do it yourself through a self-certification, it costs you £300 a year. It's a great way to benchmark yourselves what you're doing to help you have in place, to answer that question, you know, have what I got through my Microsoft Office suite sufficient to keep me protected?
Excellent.
So
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Andy. I hope that, yeah, Anchor's already responded saying thank you very much, which is great. I can see James kind of following on from investment, I guess, and is talking about insurance. And he says, is the insurance for cyber attacks additional to typical business insurance?
I'm not an insurance provider, but my genuine answer would be yes. So most business insurances will send you cover for professional indemnity and losses, but it may not cover you for losses through cyber threats. So what kind of things does insurance cover? Well, it won't cover you for penalties where clearly you've done something wrong, but it is going to cover you in the costs that you're probably going to have to invest in for additional forensics to find out what happened. So that's going to involve perhaps engaging with an external third party that comes in as a cost. I couldn't tell you the costs that come through with the insurance. What I do know, it sounds like I'm just an advocate for Cyber Essentials now, but we know it's so valuable. If you undertake Cyber Essentials, you will get basic Cyber Essentials insurance as part of that £300 a year package. But it's really a conversation you need with your broker or your insurer just to see what it would mean or what you are covered for. My colleagues often do calls with there was one live, so all the pinging that was going on earlier on was another Teams webinar that we were doing that involves an insurance company. It's a shame they wasn't on this one to answer that for you, but it's like most things, you're insuring against the possible threat of what might happen, and it's definitely worth looking into, but I would have expected most general commercial insurance won't have it as part of the package.
Excellent, thank you for that advice there. But yeah, James, it looks like perhaps reach out, find out some more information and ask some questions around your current policy. So Murphy has asked, well, first started by saying thank you for the great presentation. The question is linked to your presentation where you talked about the separation of work devices from personal devices. Mm-hmm. And Murphy would like to know is what are some of the measures that can be implemented, especially when working with a company PC?
Most of it's going to be under policy controls. There's probably little you can do. If someone's using their PC, they have a work PC at home, you can't really see what they're doing. Now, I mentioned about mobile device management. So that would be, there's an agent, if you like, some software put onto your company PC, so the company can genuinely see what's happening on your PC. And this will be so they can check what software you've got, if there's been any unauthorized access. It's not necessarily spying on to see what websites you're going on. There's probably elements of these agents that can do that, but it's purely to try and spot those main threats you're going to be seeing. I suppose certainly for home PC, if you're using your company PC, you should think about what rights a user has. So I've got a Mac. I work from home like most people do, and it's a company device. I've got 2 user admins to what I do on my PC. I've got the admin rights user, because most Macs will come with an admin rights user, and then I've got my general user. Whenever I access the internet, wherever I do any work day to day, it's always on my user profile, not my admin profile. So the admin profile only ever gets used to approve some software if I'm downloading some software, perhaps for a video conference or something else like that. By not using the admin profile, I'm reducing my significant risk that if someone hacks my computer, what they can do is much less damaging. So that's something definitely you ought to be thinking about, which prevents that. You've got some kind of endpoint management, which again, an IT company, a good IT company will be able to talk you through. Something like Intunes with Microsoft 365, I see regularly, gives power for an employer to turn around and have some degree of control. But the rest of it is just going to come down to your staff contracts, your staff policies, your bring your own device policies, where you stipulate that they can't use social media, or they shouldn't be accessing the internet, or it should be limited, as well as setting through the expectations around what they can and cannot do.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. I'm aware of the time, and I can see there's just one question remaining, so hope you don't mind just firing this with you. And it's from Darren. It might be a very quick answer. Darren asked,
that's the question. Is he allowed to ask too?
he said, is it correct that Apple Macs are far more secure than those working on a Windows platform?
They were built to be so, and therefore when you purchase a Mac, you're paying the premium because they are more secure. So Windows devices have always been susceptible to more coding issues than Mac devices, but in the advent and the escalation I mentioned that cybercrime is feeding or generating lots of money to be able to do this, Macs are being increasingly targeted. So it's not a case of you buy a Mac, you're instantly more secure. You've still got that same risk thought process to go through. What do you do? There are still not as many antivirus options for Mac devices, but I said I've got a free version because it was the only one at the time I could use. But generally, they are built to be more secure because they are controlled more so by Apple than perhaps all the applications that will go through a Windows product. But it doesn't mean to say that you're still not susceptible, because unfortunately, in this day and age, you will be. So there's always that age-old argument, I've got a Mac, I don't need security. Actually, that argument's becoming less and less strong, if you like, in terms of the defence.
I suppose criminal skills are developing as technology develops as well. So
I mean, it's one of those that, you know, your closed devices, which is where I spoke about remote access Trojan. So as a PC, your IT company can take over your PC, or Apple can, or Microsoft can, because they were open devices. Closed devices like your iPhones and your iPads generally couldn't be accessed by remote desktop access. But that is certainly in 2020, that is now something that we see and is happening. So people can now overtake any kind of device if you allow it. And again, so some of that protection through a Mac iPhone is less so than it would have been sort of like a year ago, because the threats are increasing and changing or evolving.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. So definitely worth just making sure all our products are up to date, taking the correct steps to protect ourselves. And I think this webinar has definitely helped us all learn, understand the risks that are out there, and potentially some of the solutions to help us as well. So Andy, on behalf of the APM and especially the APM London branch, I'd like to say thank you for your time and your knowledge, and for also answering those questions today.
You're welcome. And as I said, my details there if anyone just has got any other questions or wants to reach out, or I know you'll share any other questions you get, Robert. So.
Thank you, Andy. And I'd just like to extend my thanks on behalf of Andy and the APM to everyone who's joined us today. We hope you keep well, and we hope to see you at future APM webinars. See you all soon. Bye for now.
Bye.